choice is just the beginning. And a lot of what I talk about is choosing to move forward, authoring your life, having authority and agency in what you do, what you create, and what you experience. And that is the ultimate goal, but I would be lying and flying if I really didn't break it down to you all. I know for me, I've learned, and this is why I don't take information from other people. Everybody just says choose. You just have to decide. You just have to make the decision and life will change. But that wasn't clicking for my logical mind. It wasn't working. And I was just like, okay, I got to figure something out. So what I realized, choice is just the beginning, right? And when people say just choose, honestly, the way I process it might be the same for other people. It, like I said, it don't sit right. There's more to it, especially when you're a detail-oriented, logical thinker, a system thinker. Some people don't think too in depth, and that's fine. But if you do, somebody saying just choose, and you're like, okay, what? It's not going to work for you. It didn't work for me. So if you're one of those people that it didn't work for, this is going to be for you. I'm going to talk about what choosing actually looks like and what the system of choice looks like and what I've found it to be. Because choice, again, is just the beginning. It's the beginning of a cycle. It's the beginning of a system. Choice is the commitment. Choice is the commitment. Like, it's not just a magical choose in your life. It's better. It feels clear. Because choice is not the transformation itself. Choice indicates transformation. So we're going to get into the cycle. There are a few parts to the cycle. I'm going to break them down, talk about them, and hopefully you all understand. And hopefully if you're actually going through one of these cycles, you can kind of pinpoint where you are. You can actually track this to everything in life if you begin to understand what it really is. So we're going to get straight into it. You have phase 1 of choosing and deciding a different life. Phase 1, I call it diffuse possibility. So I kind of want to preface this with, think about bottleneck. Think about the form of a bottleneck, right? This form will help you understand a lot of what I'm saying, and I'm probably going to reference it a lot in this episode. So, a bottleneck narrows in the middle, and when things narrow, it gets compression, you get heat, pressure, everything like that. And at the top and the bottom, it's expanding, but in the middle, it's compression. So when you have phase 1, diffusing possibility, possibility, everything exists at once. You have no direction. You have infinite options, low pressure, low movement. People think freedom feels good, but too much possibility can actually be paralyzing. So this is where people actually choose to commit, to make a choice, right? And when you make that choice, you're diffusing possibility. So you're choosing something and you're collapsing like all the possible choices. Most people don't choose because choice has weight, and we know that. We know that unconsciously. So, most people feel better when they're indecisive because you don't have to put the pressure on yourself. You don't have to put the pressure on yourself because choice is pressure. And that commitment starts this entire cycle. And that first phase, again, is diffusing possibility. That choice is a commitment that diffuses possibility because you're choosing. You're not just looking at everything at once anymore. You're becoming decisive, And when you become decisive, you move on to the second phase, which is movement, directional movement. You have direction. You've chose something, not because you knew everything, but it was better than just looking at all possibilities and being indecisive, especially if you had energy, you wanted to move, especially if you wanted a change in your life, especially if you wanted something different. You're just like, okay, it's better to not know exactly everything instead of stay here. I'd rather choose than stay here, right? I'd rather choose to live a better life. I'd rather choose to do something else. I'd rather choose to look for another job, choose to get out of this relationship even though I don't know what's next. I just want something different, right? Choice collapses possibility into direction, right? And this is where directional movement comes from. This is the second phase, directional movement. So after you have directional movement, you're moving. And if you think of a bottleneck, again, we're going to go back to a bottleneck. At the top of the bottleneck, you have expansion, all possibilities and things like that. But as you get closer to the bottleneck, you're moving toward the narrowing compression. But again, like I said at the top, you have all possibility. But when you commit and you choose, you diffuse possibility. And when you diffuse possibility, you gain directional movement. And when you gain directional movement, you're moving towards the bottleneck now, because it's not all possibility. You don't need all that space anymore when you chose something. Space is open for infinite possibility. That's why, you have all those decisions you could make. But when you choose, you collapse that. It's not all those decisions you could make anymore. You committed to one. So you have a directional movement, which is now moving into phase 3, which is increasing constraint. And this where it gets real. Because again, if you think of a bottleneck, you're moving from, all that space at the top of the bottleneck you chose. Your directional movement is moving you towards the narrowing spot. And when things narrow, you introduce constraint. And again, phase 3, increasing constraint. You introduce constraint. And here it gets real. This is where, commitment becomes real, paths narrow. Again, think about it. A bottleneck, it's narrowing. You lose sight, really. It becomes very hard to navigate and really understand where you are. It's like, putting somebody in a dark closet, cutting all the lights off, and it's unfamiliar to them. They don't know where they're at. It's hard to navigate. It's hard to move once you start increasing constraint. But that's, what happens when you put pressure. Once you choose, you lose access to certain versions of yourself, right? That's what's going to happen. When constraints increase, you start reducing noise. Possibilities are already narrowed, and they narrow even more as you get closer and closer in the bottleneck. You chose, initially committed at the top, but the further you go down, the less room you have to choose. So here it's like, as you increase constraint, things start to feel more strict. You don't have all those paths to go in. You're committed. You're becoming even more committed, and you're actually you're choosing like to go full in, because technically you have no other choice, as possibilities start disappearing. So from increasing constraint, you go to compression and reorganization, and this is the most intense part of the bottleneck. You probably have maximum pressure here. This is the bottleneck, actually. So here in the middle of a bottleneck, you're sitting between expansion at the top, expansion at the bottom. It's almost like you're in a singularity of nothing. You don't really have any reference points. And because, again, out closer to the expanded parts is where all possibilities are. You're in the middle. You're in the rough of it. You're in the thick of it. You don't have that choice. All you have is confusion. You have pressure. You have identity restructuring. It's like You're not identifying with the old life, but the new life has not yet loaded. You don't identify with your job. You quit your job, but you don't know what's next. The bottleneck is the void. It's the void. And this is what I want people to understand. People say just choose. And when most people get to this point, they think they messed up. No. At this point, you've broken a threshold. The old can't hold you no more, but the new has to load. And this is where it all happens. But you have to withstand compression and reorganization because it's very important. Although it could be tough, and it depends on the volume of change. I will say that, because if it's an identity restructuring at your core, you're removing some old long held loops. Oh, it's gonna be rough. But it really depends on the volume. The less volume, the easier it is. But the more volume, the kind of harder it is, and the stronger the loops, the harder it is. But here in the bottleneck, phase 4, the most important, you have confusion, pressure, identity restructuring, you have instability, you have friction, you have grief. Your nervous system is overloaded. And this is where people think I made the wrong choice. But actually, it means pressure is evidence that the system is reorganization. I mean, what the hell? It means that the system is reorganizing, right? If you didn't feel the pressure, pressure creates diamonds. That pressure is what takes carbon and creates diamonds, right? And that distinction is huge. Most of the time when people get here and you don't really understand the system, because you thought it's just deciding life happens, and then you hit this void, you hit rock bottom, you're like, oh my gosh, what did I do? No. If you ever feel like you're in the void, if you ever feel like you are, lost, confused, it's pressure, everything just seems to be falling apart, everything doesn't make sense, you don't know who you are, you don't have any reference, you are in the void, and you are in compression, and you are in reorganization. That word is tear me up. But listen, there are a few things I want to talk about here, because this part is very important, because it is the hardest part to me, in my opinion, because you're not identifying with your old structure, but the new structure hasn't loaded. And honestly, when you think of science, you think of anything that transforms and goes through processes like this, you understand that the void in the state, not identifying with anything, you're in a critical state. Instability peaks, old structure dissolves, and new one hasn't loaded yet. That is hard. Transition is a very dangerous region, especially if you don't have flexible stability. And that is the most important thing that I want to mention. Because if you do not have flexible stability, and you don't have a constant within the variable, because everything in that void is variable, the only thing that's keeping you there is your constant, your will, the will that never changes, the will that holds you on, your anchor. You need to be anchored, because if you're not anchored, you can get lost. So here, flexible stability is so important, because if you come and you try to change and go through this bottleneck and you're rigid, and think about it, let's say you're a rock and you're trying to go through this bottleneck, you're too rigid. The pressure won't be able to change you. It won't. You're brittle as well, so the pressure is going to snap you. It's going to be not molding, it's going to be cracking, breaking. And once you crack and break, that's not the purpose of compression and reorganization. It's not to break you, it's to mold you. So if you're rigid, you're going to break. And if you're too soft, you're going to, think about Play-Doh. You're eventually going to break too, because too much pressure on Play-Doh separates it. You need flexible stability. You need to be able to be molded, but not like broken. Like, you need to have a core that is going to stay anchored no matter the variable around you, no matter how much you're being molded, no matter how much that compression is changing you. Because when you have that, You have stability, which will keep you there, which will keep you anchored, but you also have the flexibility to move. If you were too rigid, you're going to break. If you're too soft, you're going to break. You just need to be fluid and flexible. You need a core structure, right? And this is where things come in, that a routine that's simple enough to upkeep, to keep you to yourself, to hold your nervous system, because it is hard in the void. I can't lie. It's probably one of the hardest things for humans to go through, because our brains like prediction. And in that space, you just can't predict. You can't. That's the purpose. You're being reorganized. Like, you're not attached to the old life. You're not attached to the new one. And it takes immense strength. So, you need anchoring. You need something that keeps you here. Maybe one person, maybe journaling every day, maybe a certain song, just something that keeps you anchored. And, for me, I can kind of give examples. I prefer isolation, and you'll understand more why when you've been through this a few times, because if you understand this cycle, you'll understand that it happens everywhere and happens all the time on different intensity. So you can start to notice it and notice how to get through it, but most people don't notice it. That's why I'm introducing it. But you can understand what works for you in compression and reorganization, how you stay flexible but stable, right? So there are a few ways. I journal. I just have routine. Routine keeps you who you are, because in a void of the unknown, if you lose who you are, that I don't even know what'll happen. I don't even think it'll be no coming back. If you're in the dark and you don't even know who you are or where to go, that's not good. So again, phase 4, compression and reorganization, is the complete bottleneck, confusion, pressure, identity restructuring, instability, friction, grief, nervous system overload. You didn't make the wrong choice. It's important to know pressure is evidence that the system is reorganizing, and important here to anchor yourself and have flexible stability. It will get you through the bottleneck for sure. But without that constant, there's no organizing principle. You lose the continuity, and you don't have a recovery trajectory. You can't recover. You don't have an origin. You don't have a core. You need an invariant structure that maintains continuity through transformation. That is important here. So basically, you need a structure that is not variable, invariant. So it does not change. It's very constant, and that will maintain, because it doesn't change, continuity. So it will maintain moving forward. It will maintain movement through transformation, through this restructuring, compression, and organization. Anything that has pressure on it is going to restructure. So from this compression in reorganization phase, which is phase 4, we go to phase 5. Phase 5, we have emergence. So in phase 5, the pressure is kind of loosening. You've been structured, and you're emerging. The new self becomes visible, but it's important to know it's not stable yet. You're still close to the bottleneck. You're very vulnerable, but you've been transformed enough to be emerging, right? So key points here: you start to see and understand your new standards. You have a stronger identity. You have new behaviors. You have clearer desires. Things actually start to make sense for you. In the void, nothing makes sense, and it's not going to make sense. Like, it's just really not, and you shouldn't force it. But here you get glimpses of coherence. Things start to feel like, okay, it makes a little bit of sense. But it's important to know here, you're still vulnerable, and things are still moving. So don't worry. The external world may not fully reflect the internal restructuring yet. And it's gonna happen, but again, in emergence, you're coming out of the bottleneck. You still don't know everything. It's just not going it's going to take time, because if you're not fully internally cured or solid, you can't project that either. And another important thing here in Emergence, or just with like this whole cycle in general, I will say that it's important to know that clarity is gradient. So you move, it's like clarity increases as you move through the bottleneck. You're not going to have clarity. It increases as you stabilize. And that's crazy, because most people want clarity before they move, but clarity usually comes after. So, understand that you're not going to understand. You have to be comfortable with uncertainty if you want to grow. That's life. And the more you can become comfortable with uncertainty, the more you can grow, the more you can phase through these cycles and transform as you understand it. But if you've never really heard of this, it's hard to understand moving forward with no clarity. Action precedes clarity a lot of the times. In these instances, I actually have a few episodes on, action preceding clarity. I think one of my first ones, walking through the fog. You just got to take those steps. It'll clear up as you go, but you got to go. And eventually, clarity will come. But yeah, emergence, again, the external world may not fully reflect internal restructuring yet, but eventually, as you cure and as you begin to solidify, it will happen. And that is phase 5, emergence. We're going to move on to phase 6, stabilization. So here in stabilization, the new structure learns consistency, not perfection, but consistency. So you have a rhythm, and rhythm is the most important. You have a routine, repeated reinforcement, protecting the new structure. You can tie in all the things that you kind of held on to keep you stable at your core, and keep those going, but they become more reinforced. But this does not fully mean that you're 100% stable yet, and things may not look 100% complete yet, and that's okay. But you are stabilizing here, and things become more clear, because again, clarity is gradient. So you're moving further away from the bottleneck, you're stabilizing. This phase is exactly what it sounds like, stabilization. I don't really have to explain that much, but yeah, you're stabilizing. And another important thing, like, to kind of explain clarity gradient, when I talk about it, you can't see the full picture in the picture. Like, when you're in the bottleneck, you can't see the full picture. When you're up close, you can't see the full picture. But when you change your perspective and you back up and you get away from it, the picture becomes clearer. So keep that in mind with understanding this. We're moving on to phase 7. So phase 6, stabilization. Phase 7, observable coherence. And this is the last phase in my choice cycle. Observable coherence. What that means, now people can see the structure. It's coherent, it's stable, it's cured enough for people to see it. This is important because people think usually the transformation happened suddenly, but they only saw the final stabilized phase. And here, you don't have to worry about outside noise affecting you or anything of that sort. That's something that I really didn't mention. So this episode, is not fully structured all the way correctly. So there are a couple things I didn't mention that I want to mention. So I will mention from phase 4, which is compression and reorganization, through phase 6 You want to be careful of external input because you're very fragile still. And you don't want anything, distorting your transformation at all, because it's not cured. Think of sidewalk that's been poured and been molded. It looks good from our eyes, but if you step on it, you are going to you're going to make it imprinted. It's not going to cure fully, and now it's going to be deformed. You don't want to deform anything. You got to be careful, because when you're not cured and you're not stable and you don't have that observable coherence or full stabilization, you can be impressed because you're vulnerable in those stages. Coming out of transformation, you're vulnerable. You have to lock in and become stable again before you allow too much external input. That's why, honestly, in my opinion, I think it's very important to kind of go through these in isolation. Go through this phase in isolation, because you don't want a bunch of external input. You don't want to be deformed. You want it to be authentically you and how you want to emerge from, this cycle. Is very important to have those boundaries so you're not deformed. And it may take you having to move or find a way to have your own space, because maybe not everybody understands, but you are the most important factor in this. You want to make sure that you come out fully formed and ready to have observable coherence. And another thing with that is not just allowing other people to deform you, but don't move too quick. Let yourself stabilize. Let yourself cure, be fully solid before just throwing yourself into places or things, because without fully curing, you are impressible. Like having wet nails and running around and not letting them dry at the nail shop, that is no good. It's no good. You're gonna mess them up. Same with the concrete. Let it cure and then let people walk all over it, right? It's important in cycles to let things fully cycle and then move. You just have to have patience with all of this. You have to have patience, and you have to have a strong core. And another thing that I kind of didn't really talk about here, but it's important to understand that you can also not make it through these cycles all the way, especially if you're in phase 4, compression and reorganization. That's very tough. It's a very tough place to be. And if you don't have the capacity to handle the pressure and the confusion and the identity restructuring, and you regress back to the old structure, nothing's wrong with that, right? We hope you all make it through the full cycle, but if you regress, it can happen sometimes when you don't have the capacity to handle all of this. And if you go back, it's not like you're gonna start from scratch. You're gonna go back changed a little bit. You're gonna go back basically asymmetric. So half of you will be changed or however much, and the rest won't be. And that's kind of not good, because now you're gonna be even more fragmented. So it's not bad that you don't you don't compress and reorganize all the way. It's not that, because it is very tough, but it's important to know your capacity and how much you can handle before commitment, because most of the time capacity precedes bottleneck. What I mean there is, you build the capacity before you go through the bottleneck. You build the capacity to handle the pressure of the bottleneck so you don't break, crack, dismember. And building the capacity for the bottleneck is literally just progressive loading. So over time, you increase more pressure, more tension, just more uncomfortability, so you know how to hold it, right? That's what you introduce, so you know how to hold it. Because if you just jump straight in to the bottleneck and you've never done any loading, you haven't had load bearing on your system, unless you just like that, it may be no good. If you just like that and you really didn't know your capacity and you just had a capacity, shout out to you. But if you don't, I don't recommend that. Progressive load, see what you can handle. And also, it really does depend on the volume of change. Again, if you're going through, a little bit of change and restructuring, you'll be fine, right? It depends on your capacity as well. See, this is where it gets tricky because I can't tell you. It's for you to decide. It depends on your capacity, and it depends on the volume of change, and you have to know those things within yourself. So that's for you. I give that authority to you. You know your capacity. You should know your capacity, and you should know the volume of change. And the volume of change, look at what's changing. Are you just, changing homes in the same city? Are you moving states, which is bigger than just changing homes in the same city? Are you like changing relationships, changing jobs? I mean, different role in same company, new company, certain things come with more intensity. You have to, observe that yourself and weigh it yourself. But you have to be careful and progressively load and make sure that you have the capacity when going through the bottleneck, because you're literally restructuring yourself. Don't be scared if you're losing things. The old can't come into the new spot. That's what the bottleneck is for. It's making sure it squeeze and compress everything that no longer fits out. So lose everything you can. Don't force, just flow. It's going to do all the work. You're going to feel it. Be present as much as you can. Don't lie to yourself. Make sure to anchor yourself in these situations and just observe. And make sure that you be patient, because patience is a virtue, and rushing this ain't going to get you nowhere, but keep you in the same spot. So all I have to say to close this is, if you made a choice and life got harder after, that does not automatically mean you chose wrong. Sometimes pressure is the evidence that reorganization has begun. Choice is not the end. Choice is the entrance. It is the commitment to breaking through that bottleneck and becoming a new bad bit. Yeah. I hope this was helpful. I'll have in the description the cycle and a little more explanation for you all. And let me know if you have any questions or anything like that. I don't really structure my episodes, so I just talk, and sometimes I can be rambling, say things over and over again, but I hope you all got the point. And yeah, I hope that you use this or find something that works for you, or just begin to understand cycles and how they show up in your life. And when you understand them, you can get through them better. You can grow more efficiently and quicker and become the person you always wanted to be. So I can't wait to see y'all do that. Bye, guys.